A few years ago, GD seemed to be a game with unlimited potential. It went from a simple block-based mobile platformer into one of the most active, in-depth and popular indie games in the world. Since this peak, however, the game seems to have been on a steady decline for a number of reasons, from lack of attention to the game by the developer through to an increasingly toxic community emerging in the stagnation period. Since this decline began, the so-called death of Geometry Dash has been a hotly discussed topic, with some wanting it imminently and others hoping the game can survive the coming years. Regardless of your opinion on the death, an estimation of how the game will die has never really been attempted before, so in this video I'm going to explain to you, through 3 perspectives, the process I believe which will result in the death of Geometry Dash. Obviously, this is all completely speculative and by no means correct. However, from my experience with the community, both in-game and on YouTube, I believe that the events and actions I'm about to discuss will be in and around the community when it ends. With that said, let's crack on. The first perspective we're going to analyse it from is the player perspective, and as I believe this will kick off the Geometry apocalypse. Obviously, at any one time, Geometry Dash is ruled by a few big established players. For the end to begin, we will need the world's 3 top players, Sunix, Diamond Splash and Scullo, to quit the game. They don't have to necessarily quit either, with Sunix moving more towards Osu and things like that. People like N-Level will come and take their place, however as we've seen multiple times, N-Level is in and out of activity and Geometry Dash in general, so it's unlikely he'll be able to be a permanent solution. After the loss of the best players, the most well-known players will likely quit too, players like Nobbleboy, Truster and Sagayesta. There's nothing to suggest that they will out and out quit, but Truster is already exhibiting large bouts of inactivity. With all the skilled player channels with upwards of 80,000 subscribers falling into this kind of activity, we then come to the next part of the decline. A lot of upcoming projects will fail. If we lose the biggest and best from the community, it's likely that a lot of levels that are upcoming, like Orochi, Zodiac and Sonic Wave Infinity and perhaps other things like Ouroboros, will be left up in the air without verifiers. General large-scale demons that are given to big players will fail and will be left without a verifier. Now, obviously new verifiers are found in time, but the climate of GD has taken a turn for the worse recently, and as so many channels have been forecasting, I believe these failing levels will each cause their own level stealing drama. Smaller players seeing the opportunity for glory will forcefully take leaked copies of big levels and try to verify them, like with the Neuron X Gaming and Innid situation. If the collabs and levels are owned by more prominent figures such as Viperin, this could lead to striking of videos or in-game consequences such as banning from RobTop. Regardless of the outcome, any drama surrounding a level stealing makes the level toxic and not fun to play or talk about. Imagine the Bloodlust drama, but amplified among 5 or 6 big upcoming extreme demons at the same time, and hence the GD community will become much more divided and much more hostile. With the big players gone and the big demons gone and the community starting to fall apart, it will be up to the smaller players who remain underneath like KevTom and Cincy to carry the torch and support the oversaturated and frustrated new polarised fanbase of GD who have lost their favourite players and levels. I cannot see these types of players being particularly incentivised to inherit such a cancerous audience, especially during this time span. It's likely factors such as school will begin to blight their time to play GD. With all this, the biggest and best gone, the upcoming extreme demons either cancelled or in doubt, and the community in turmoil, all that will be left will be the mega channels, Guitar Hero Styles, Mika and Partition. I highly doubt these players will ever quit, but they offer nothing to the community and simply ride off hype, and hence the pools of noteworthy levels and community events they make their videos out of will dry up, and, though they will obviously maintain an audience, their audience will become less interested, and their likes and views on their average videos will be marginalised somewhat, and they will become large-scale but redundant YouTubers. After this, GD's remaining players will become less interested as they are absorbed in other games like Osu, and the more active portion of the community will become inactive. The one group unaccounted for in this case is streamers, who will likely survive the purge. These kinds of players are Chris Credible, Flub and Raising. However, they won't be able to carry the community by themselves as their content revolves far more around a brand name and not actually contributing things like levels and events to Geometry Dash. They will continue to maintain an audience but nothing out of this world. It's worth mentioning that with all this happening, mobile players will die out more and more as well. We predicted that hardware would keep up with GD, however the predominantly young mobile fanbase will not be buying Galaxy S9s and iPhone Xs just for GD. They'll move on to other phones that can't handle the big popular levels, and this will take a huge chunk of the player base out, a base that fuels GD. Downloads on levels will fall in-game, and gradually people will either stop playing and will uninstall the game. The in-game traffic will fall significantly and level IDs will slow on the increase, etc, etc. It's worth mentioning as we conclude this section that this will probably happen over the time period of about 18 months at the very least. This isn't going to be some overnight collapse that you wake up to. It will be a slippery slope, but could probably be avoided for some time by kicking this level stealing trend in the arse once and for all. As this decline occurs, RobTop will likely act in parallel. While he has more to do with the game than most developers, he has very little contact with us now compared to how he used to with the days of things like Touch Arcade. As GD dies and disappears more, his contact with the game will reduce more, which will mean his attention to levels and indeed bigger levels will decrease. This will start to become clear when more levels like Necropolis and Hyperparacosm start to emerge, demons that have not yet been rated purely out of laziness. This will annoy more players like End Level and Blast, and will inspire more of the remaining players to quit when it starts happening to their levels. As he becomes more detached, he will start narrowing his feature scope too. More and more levels from a small pool of creators who pump out low quality generic levels will get featured, because it's a safe bet and a 5-minute job to rate a bunch of levels whose formula never really changes. This isn't a sustainable way to feature levels, and as the problem gets worse and worse, interest will be lost in everything apart from extreme demons. And when all the extreme demons become enveloped in toxicity, and the smaller remaining players realise they can't play extreme demons, these players will slowly filter out too. The mods will try and help, the likes of Partition and Shaggy23, but if RobTop becomes more used to featuring from a small pool of levels, even level sends won't change that. After this, updates will take longer again. The 1.5 year waiting time for 2.1 will be matched by the wait for 2.2, and I reckon it will be between 21 months and 2 years before 2.3 is released. As we saw with 2.1, more and more features will be released to reward farming players, but since this type of player will be exiting the game fast, they won't really be of any interest to anyone. Instead, the next generation of things like camera controls and vehicles will be less and less inspired, and these features will be actively panned and criticised, and the remaining players will see little point in continuing playing. The lack of contact with RobTop will increase so much so that, in my opinion, we'll be waiting 12 months at a time for bug fix update, and by this point it will be too far gone. At this point, RobTop will stop releasing cash cow games like Sub-Zero and Meltdown 2. With 3 dead, inactive and poorly maintained games already, I would be very much surprised if RobTop tries to pull this off again. RobTop will be so rich by this point that he'll never likely make another game, and he'll be so minted from GD that he can probably afford to retire now, and I believe he will soon, if he hasn't already. And I also believe, if he hasn't already, he will focus his attention on becoming a father with his wife. When he's a dad and he's more busy, following this the only updates in any form will be server upgrades, bug fixes and the occasional bouts of level features, but this won't be major and GD will move into a limbo for the rest of its days. Finally, we have to ask where the non-gameplay channels will be through all this. Non-gameplay channels are pretty essential next to big channels for keeping GD alive, as their more diverse content keeps the YouTube community for GD more interested outside of farming channels like Partition. Currently, there are a number of non-gameplay channels, myself included, starting to add more strings to their bow. Back in 2016, if a GD YouTuber played another game or did any other kind of content, they'd be slammed for it. Now, that's simply not the case. There's a growing interest from GD players for their favourite GD YouTubers to dabble in other video types, and the crossover creates generally about 30% of audience retention. So, if you upload non-GD stuff, it will still get a third of your GD views as long as it is vaguely interesting. This isn't ideal, but it's enough to turn a monthly profit for most channels, and gradually they will start to establish non-GD content that will grow both inside and outside of the community, such as, and I'm sorry to name drop my own series here, Conspiracy Cases or something like that. On top of this, a lot of non-gameplay channels are musicians and artists that have a real talent for video production. The likes of Etzer and Floroni will leave the game behind in favour of pursuing their own EDM aspirations, and other people like Juniper will likely find an opportunity for their video editing skills elsewhere. As this happens, some of the non-GD content will begin to attract attention from a wider audience, and non-GD videos will become the most viewed videos for GD channels, further incentivising them to move away from GD on their channels. Gradually, once RobTop stops engaging with the community, the non-gameplay channels will begin the final stages of the full transition to non-GD content. For some, this will land and they will become more established outside of GD, and for others they will gradually fade out due to real-life factors and lack of persistence. Those who pull through and prevail could end up walking their own unique paths to 100 and 200,000 subscribers. We're talking a few years here once again, and for the large part these channels will eventually die out too, but this could be a productive and potential path for them to walk after Geometry Dash has lapsed. Ultimately, this type of YouTuber will have a better chance of surviving GD's death, though you can't really tell who will do what. So to summarise what we've discussed, how exactly will GD die in short? Well, it will begin with the big players quitting and the best players. The semi-large players will soon follow, and this will result in dramas over the levels they leave behind. This will make GD's community too toxic for many, and the interest will begin to dwindle. Meanwhile, GD will continue to become more device dependent, and mobile players will stop fueling in-game traffic and will die out. The smaller channels will have less incentive to play and will start to face other commitments like school, which will lead them away from the game. The mega channels will turn into irrelevant hype beasts. While this happens, RobTop will become more and more distant. Updates will take longer and will most likely stop completely after 2.3. GD's in-game traffic will crash and then slump further, causing fewer and fewer events in-game. Non-gameplay channels will start to move away into non-GD content, and the interest in the game overall will fall to its lowest point since around 1.4 and 1.5. Over the span of a few years, all the channels will either quit or go inactive, and the player fanbase for GD will be reduced to a redundant level, barely guided by a few mega channels with minimal views. No one will talk about the game, and nothing really will happen after this. About 5 years after, there will be no activity from RobTop whatsoever, and GD will be like an abandoned building, and at some point over the next decade, I imagine it will be taken off the App Store or Steam. Generally, while GD is doing okay at the moment, the best years do seem to be behind us, and now the majority of GD history seems to have happened. GD will gradually become an indie platformer game of memory as more and more games with advanced capabilities are released. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you did enjoy this slightly morbid video. If you did, please hit that like button, and if you're new around here, if you can consider subscribing and checking out some of my other videos, then I'd really appreciate it. Thanks a lot guys, I'll see you all soon.